The days leading up to Easter are what we call as Christians Holy Week. Holy Week encapsulates a number of things, from Jesus' entrance into Jerusalem with palms, to Holy Thursday, the Last Supper, to Good Friday, his death on the cross, and then of course his resurrection on Easter morning. And as Christians, as Catholics in particular, we have a number of traditions that we've incorporated into our worship that week. So what I would like to do is use this opportunity to explain some of those traditions. We'll walk through each of those days briefly, explain some of the things that you might experience if you go to a Catholic church on those days, and highlight a little bit of why Holy Week is such an important part of our spirituality as Catholics. Holy Week begins with Palm Sunday. If you were to go to a Catholic church on Palm Sunday, you'll be handed a palm branch when you walk into the church. And there will be a point in the beginning of that liturgy in which all the palm branches are sprinkled with holy water, and there's a reading of a gospel where we're told about Jesus riding into Jerusalem on a donkey. So these are the days, of course, leading up to Jesus' eventual arrest and death on the cross. But that week started with Jesus triumphantly riding into Jerusalem, and the crowds were following him. The crowds were so excited. Jesus riding in on a donkey is a clear symbol of his authority as king. It's a sign that he is the Messiah. That palm is also a sign of kingship. It's a sign of peace. And there's just abundant joy that day as Jesus rode into Jerusalem. Now, of course, that will change in the coming days as we know that Jesus is ultimately arrested. But we begin the Mass in a similar way. We hold our branches. We remember how Jesus entered into Jerusalem. You could even say there's something of a procession as Mass actually begins at the back of the church. And then the priest and the deacon and the servers, and they process up to the front after that reading of the gospel. And then in the course of that liturgy, probably the most significant thing we'll do in the course of the Palm Sunday liturgy is reading the Passion. That cycles through the different Passions, Matthew, Mark, and Luke. But there's a long reading of the entire Passion narrative. So you're used to the gospel lasting maybe a couple of minutes when you attend Sunday Mass. This is a longer reading of one of the narratives of the gospel as we hear about all that happens in the course of Holy Week, as Jesus celebrates the Last Supper, as Jesus is arrested and ultimately killed. So another name for Palm Sunday is Passion Sunday. Thursday of Holy Week is referred to as Holy Thursday. This is primarily a celebration, a remembrance of what happened at the Last Supper. All the Gospels tell us about Jesus gathering with his disciples at the Last Supper for this Passover meal. And in the course of that meal, of course, he establishes the Eucharist, and in doing so, he establishes the priesthood. Gospel of John also tells us about the washing of the feet. And so in many places, many Catholic churches, if you go to Mass on Holy Thursday, you'll find that the priest takes the time in the course of that liturgy, sometime after the homily, to wash the feet of the apostles, you could say. Wash the feet of some of the disciples in the community, people who are already people of service, people who maybe deserve some recognition. A reminder for the priest, I can say from myself being there, it's a reminder to myself that I'm called to be a servant. I'm called to be the one who washes the feet of others, but also an opportunity maybe to remind ourselves that there are already people in our community who are doing this for other people. They are, through their acts of service, through their love of others, they are washing the feet of other people all the time. According to the Gospels, after the Last Supper, Jesus goes out to pray. He goes to the Garden of Olives, and he brings with him a few of the apostles. And they pray there together, and this is where Jesus prays, "Lord, may this cup pass from me, but not my will, your will be done." And that will ultimately be the place where Jesus is arrested. And so, in an interesting liturgical twist that we're not used to, the Mass doesn't actually end at the end of Holy Thursday Mass. We get to the end of that liturgy, and instead of finishing with a final blessing, the priest processes out of the church with the Eucharist to an altar of repose, is what we call it. Another altar, maybe it's within the church, maybe it's in another building, but the Eucharist is set in a different place and where he's adored in the tabernacle, and the people come to pray there, almost like we're following Jesus on that pilgrimage to the Garden of Olives to pray with him there. We finish the Mass by processing out of the church, following Jesus to this place of prayer, a place that's kind of like the Garden of Olives, to go be with the Lord. You'll remember that the Gospels tell us that when the apostles went to go pray with Jesus, they kept falling asleep, and Jesus would say to them, "Could you not stay awake with me for 1 hour?" So there's a tradition, you could say, of as Jesus is processed to this other location, this other altar of repose, we're invited to pray, if we can, for an hour, to stay with him and pray, just like Jesus asked the apostles that night of the Last Supper. Good Friday is a day of sorrow. It's a day of prayer. It's good in the sense that what Jesus has done for us is good for our souls. It is necessary for our salvation. But it's heavy, right? Remembering Jesus' crucifixion, his violent death on the cross. There's a heaviness to that. If we love the Lord as our friend, we're going to feel the sorrow that's in his heart. If we are willing to stand at the foot of the cross like John and the Blessed Mother did and Mary Magdalene, we're going to feel the sorrow that they felt standing with Jesus at the foot of his cross. And so you could say that on Good Friday, we're entering into that. We're fasting that day. We're spending more time recollecting what happened and the cost of our freedom, the cost of our eternal life that Jesus has purchased for us with his death. And in the course of that liturgy, this Good Friday liturgy, we do a couple of things. We read the Passion narrative according to the Gospel of John. Because remember, John was standing at the foot of the cross. He was there to witness Jesus' death. And so we remember his account. We read, again, that long narrative of John's Gospel. And we're kind of trying to be there side by side with the Lord. A notable thing about that particular liturgy is we venerate the cross together as a community. So maybe the cross will come through the community with fabric being taken off of it piece by piece until we kind of reveal Jesus in his suffering on the cross. And then there's an opportunity for the community as a whole usually to venerate the cross, maybe even to come forward one at a time. We often venerate the cross with a genuflection, by touching the cross, by kissing the cross, something to show that we love the Lord and that we're willing to be with him in the midst of his suffering. Saturday of Holy Week is referred to as Holy Saturday. This is a time where we just remember the fact that Jesus is in the tomb, and maybe we allow ourselves to experience some of the quiet, some of the calm of death, and kind of reflect a little bit still on what happened the day before with Jesus' death on the cross. And we're looking forward, of course, as Christians, we're looking forward to Easter, but we allow ourselves to kind of be like Mary Magdalene, waiting outside of the tomb, praying, longing for the Lord. She's eventually going to go home, and when she comes back, she's going to find that tomb empty. That's great news. But there is going to be a time, probably on Saturday, when the people just mourn. The people just are reflecting on the fact that Jesus is no longer with us. And so we enter into the spirit of that a little bit on Holy Saturday. Then after the sun sets, most parishes are going to celebrate what we call the Easter Vigil. It's the beginning of the Easter celebration on Holy Saturday night. And this will include lots of things. It's going to include a reading of a large portion of the scriptures. It'll probably take about an hour in most parishes to read through so many of these Old Testament prophecies, these covenants that the Lord has made with his people. We get lots of the Psalms along the way. And there's a whole ceremony around the candle as the church starts in darkness. And Jesus is the light of the world that enters into the darkness of the church. It's a really beautiful liturgy. And then after the homily, after the gospel and the priest preaches his homily, then there's the initiation of new Catholics. So we bring into the life of the church people who have been preparing to be Catholic by baptism, by confirmation, and by their first Holy Communion. And then, of course, there's Easter Sunday, right? It's a day of joy, it's hope, it's a day of resurrection, right? Jesus is no longer in the tomb. Jesus is risen from the dead. The stone is rolled away. The disciples have come and they've seen that the tomb is empty, and they rejoice. And we're going to hear in the course of the rest of the Easter season all of these times in which Jesus appeared in the flesh to his followers as a reminder that death didn't conquer him. He conquered death. So for us, that's a sign that Jesus is exactly who he said he is. Jesus must be the Messiah, which means that I better live the way that he's called me to live, because everything that he has said is absolutely true. And if I'm united to him, then I also have victory over sin. I also have victory over death. So for us as Christians, Easter is the most important feast. This is the beginning of our new life in Christ. One of the main things that someone will notice when they go to Mass on Easter Sunday is not just the decoration, although there's probably going to be lilies and that sort of thing in the sanctuary. The main thing that you're going to notice at Easter Mass is going to be the renewal of our baptismal promises, as the priest will ask over and over, do you renounce Satan? Do you believe in God the Father Almighty, creator of heaven and earth? That sort of thing. And we profess what it is that we believe. We're remembering that day in which we were united to Jesus through our baptism. And then there's a sprinkling of holy water over all of us, as just like water was poured over our heads in the moment of our baptism, we're being sprinkled with that water, a reminder of that new life that we have in Jesus that we get to celebrate again on Easter. Holy Week is heavy. Holy Week is sorrowful, and it's also rich and beautiful. If you've never experienced any of these things with Holy Week, like Holy Thursday or Good Friday or Easter Vigil, I encourage you just to try it out. Spend some extra time there. I promise you, the Lord is going to reward you for the generosity of your heart for choosing to go be with him as he goes through some element of his passion, some element of this Paschal mystery of walking side by side with him. That will always be something that is rewarded by the Lord. When we choose to stay close to him, he's going to choose to stay close to us. God bless you.